This is O.J. Simpson.
Nobody does it better.
If you were around in the 1990s, he was almost impossible to escape.
The O.J. verdict. Shock of the century.
His murder trial played nonstop on 24/7 news channels and set the tone for the most sensational era of journalism that America had ever known. But the O.J. Simpson saga was a lot more important than you might guess. That's because it set the financial, the algorithmic, and rhetorical foundations for the age of narcissism-powered social media that we all live through today.
The O.J. case was the beginning of reality TV.
It wasn't just a murder story. It was really a tale of our time.
With us on the phone now is O.J. Simpson.
On June 17th, 1994, 95 million people tuned in to watch a white Ford Bronco driving slowly down a freeway with a fleet of police cars falling in behind. Just before O.J. took off, his lawyer stood in front of a bank of microphones and read a letter that Simpson had left behind. A letter that everyone in America understood at the time to be his last words.
This letter was written by O.J. today.
To think of it another way, the whole thing was a carefully orchestrated live stream designed to hold a platformless public in rapt attention.
Please think of the real O.J. and not this lost person.
And I want you to hold the existence of that letter in your mind, because we're going to get right back to it. But first, there's a part of the Simpsons story that you might have never come across. A chapter written more than 10 years after the brutal murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman that I still find almost impossible to believe. After a California jury declared him not guilty, O.J. Simpson sat down with a ghostwriter named Paul Fenyez, a man who testified against him at his criminal trial.
I think it was very clear to O.J. that I thought he was guilty, and for me to have lied to him at that point would have been counterproductive.
And they wrote a book together where O.J. confessed to the murders.
I remember I grabbed a knife. I'm standing there, and there's all kind of blood and stuff around.
I read that book last week, and I have to tell you, it is one of the strangest literary documents that I've ever come across. Not only for what is actually on its pages, but for how the thing came to be published at all. So in today's video, we're going to talk about If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer. What it means inside the Simpson case, and more importantly, what it means outside of it. For the profitability of murder, for the failure of the American legal system to enforce its own judgments, and for a personality style that this entire affair took out of the pathology textbooks and installed at the very center of American public life. I promise you that this is about as strange a story as has ever been told. If you happen to be under 40 years old, you might only know the vague outlines of O.J. Simpson's case, so let's briefly go over the broad strokes. On June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson, O.J.'s ex-wife, and Ron Goldman are found stabbed to death outside her condominium in the Brentwood neighborhood of L.A. 5 days later, Simpson is supposed to surrender to police, but instead he gets into the back of a white Bronco driven by his friend Al Cowlings and leads a slow-speed pursuit down the 405 while helicopters film it and America watches. And while that was happening, Robert Kardashian reads the note to a phalanx of news reporters.
To whom it may concern, first, everyone understand I had nothing to do with Nicole's murder.
And if you're wondering why that name sounds so familiar, yes, that Robert Kardashian is father to Kim and Khloe, who were children in the house where O.J. Simpson sometimes stayed. His ex-wife Kris would later marry the Olympic decathlete Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner. They are together the most durable celebrity family in America, and in a literal sense, they were incubated inside the O.J. Simpson murder case. And it's not a coincidence.
I answered the phone and it was a call from jail. And it was OJ, and I handed my mom the phone because he wanted to speak to her, and I just remember them getting into it.
In another world, in a better world, Kim Kardashian would have remembered more about that call. And if this had gone down 30 years later, it would have been a snap. Which is why I want to tell you about something that has completely transformed my workflow. You see, the other day I was at my optometrist's office, and a source called me with some breaking information.
And usually I wouldn't be able to record the call, but because I had PLAUD AI, all I had to do was press the button and I could record the call.
I was able to do that because I had my PLAUD Note Pro magnetized right to the back of my phone. A few minutes after the call was over, PLAUD had already generated a full transcript, an AI summary, and pulled out all of the key takeaways. It also integrates everything right onto my computer so I can record and summarize meetings and videos and interviews and always have a record of what was said and know what I need to get to next. There's also this feature called Ask PLAUD where you can query your own recordings just like a search engine. I just ask it what I need and it looks through all of my recordings and gets me the answers I'm looking for. To give you an example of how this works, I did a summary of this video that you can check out at the link in the description. And look, we all know that privacy matters. That's why PLAUD uses end-to-end encryption and promises that your recordings are never used to train their models. Use the code Carney for 10% off. There's a link and PLAUD-generated AI summary of this video right down in the description.
I am so psyched to have this device.
All right, let's get back to OJ. The criminal trial ran from January to October of 1995. There were cameras in the courtroom. Johnny Cochran, Mark Furman, The Glove, threats of LA riots. And on October 3rd, 1995, the jury moved to acquit.
We, the jury,
find the defendant not guilty of the crime of murder.
And more than half the nation watched the whole thing unfold live on TV, drawing an audience of at least 150 million people. To put that in perspective, at the time, the United States had a total population of 260 million people. That's 50 million more people than actually voted in the subsequent 1996 presidential election. And that single fact should frame your understanding of all of America's electoral politics. Anyway, the upshot was that Simpson walked out of the court a free man. But like any good live stream, it was hardly the end of the story, because here's the thing. In America, you can be acquitted of murder and still be held financially liable for a death in a separate courtroom, in a civil trial, under a completely different standard of proof. And in the second trial, there was a lot more evidence that never made it into the criminal one. You see, in a criminal trial, the state has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Or to put it another way, the jury needs to be 99% sure that he did it. But in a civil wrongful death suit, the plaintiff only has to show that it is more likely than not that the defendant caused the death. And that barrier of evidence is more like a 51-49 split, which is more favorable to the plaintiffs in that case. So, unwilling to let Simpson get away with murder, Fred Goldman, Ron's father, sued, and so did the Brown family. Here's how Derek from Legal Eagle summarized the new evidence that came up in the second trial.
And another factor that helped the civil case was the admission of evidence that had not been used in the criminal case, including photographs proving Simpson lied when he denied ever owning the brand of shoes that had left bloody footprints at the scene. In the criminal case, jurors never learned that a men's size 12 Bruno Magli brand shoe print stamped in the victim's blood was discovered at the crime scene. However, in the civil case, the lawyers showed the jury 30 photographs of Simpson wearing those shoes. Only 299 pairs of these shoes were ever sold in the United States. And in his deposition, Simpson said,
"Did you ever buy shoes that you knew were Bruno Magli shoes?"
No, because I know if Bruno Magli makes shoes that look like the shoes they had in court that's involved in this case, I would have never worn those ugly-ass shoes.
But then you can see his reaction when he's confronted with photographs.
And that is a picture of you looking at Exhibit 1, correct?
It appears to be me, yes.
Holy moly! I mean, you don't get a guiltier look than that. So, in February of 1997, a jury in Santa Monica found Simpson liable for Ron Goldman's death and for battery against Nicole Brown, and awarded a total of $33.5 million in damages.
O.J. Simpson left, now clearly identified by this jury as the killer, ordered to pay his entire fortune and more to the parents of Ron Goldman.
And that's where the saga ended. Justice ultimately, if perhaps imperfectly, delivered. The Goldmans found resolution in bankrupting and impoverishing their son's killer.
No.
Wait.
They didn't.
Oh.
That's not what happened. The thing that most people don't know about civil court in America is that the judgment is only the beginning of a long and sometimes impossible journey to actually collect on the debt. And OJ's legal team used every legal trick to shield him from ever having to pay a dime.
Oh, so I guess I just jumped the gun a little bit here.
Yeah, you could say that, because none of this really makes sense until you think about all the other money involved, and that had nothing to do with the court judgment.
Well, yeah. So what then?
The media.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was wonderful. Right. I guess that's the real story here. The trial turned out to be just fuel for more media fire, because the OJ trial was just the original sea change in media coverage, where sensationalism paired with low production costs created vast fortunes almost overnight. Start with CNN. In 1994 and 1995, CNN pulled in an estimated $200 million in net revenue, almost entirely generated from ads that played during the trial. This was largely because the cost of that coverage was basically nothing. The courtroom feed was a shared pool camera. The network didn't have to send its correspondents into a war zone or really anywhere hard to get to at all other than Los Angeles. They just pointed this lens at the room and then added pundits and sold advertising against it. The trial launched an era of court TV, not to mention the careers of people who developed the architecture of the next 30 years of the media. And I'm talking about Jeffrey Toobin and Nancy Grace and Greta Sundstrand and Dan Abrams and Harvey Levin, who went on to found none other than TMZ.
I got a tip that OJ was going to be prosecuted for domestic violence.
According to the media historian Michael Sokolov, the trial was the impetus for Rupert Murdoch to actually launch Fox News. Sokolov wrote that the Australian media mogul grew enraged at watching CNN's founder Ted Turner rake in all of that cash. So Murdoch was energized to launch his right-wing alternative in 1996 to grab his own slice of that lucrative pie. And while I'm not going to go into the history of the Fox News network and how it led directly to the Trump administration, I will leave you to make what you will of this clip.
Well, I knew OJ very well. I knew him very well. I better not get into it. I knew OJ so well.
The more you dig, the more that everything seems to go back to this trial, from the way we frame content to the economics and ultimately our political system as well, which brings us back to the whole reason that I made this video in the first place. 11 years after the murders, O.J. Simpson had dropped out of the limelight, but he had realized that he could make some money still by directly profiting off that murder narrative. And in late October 2006, the National Enquirer reported that O.J. Simpson was going to issue a hypothetical confession. His lawyers denied it, but then 3 weeks later it was announced for real, a book called If I Did It, to be published on November 30th by Reagan Books, an imprint of HarperCollins, with a 2-night Fox television special to go with it, for which he was paid $1 million. Or about $630,000 after taxes and agent commissions and the like.
Some people say maybe it's blood money. Well, guess what? Every book that was written about this case was blood money.
The Goldman family, who hadn't seen a dime from the judgment, thought it was blood money too. And they immediately hit the talk show circuit to shame the publisher into pulling the book entirely.
It's even more disgusting to me that a publisher would get involved and that Fox would get involved. To imagine that this is the kind of trash that they think their viewers want to watch.
They launched an online petition demanding HarperCollins cancel the book, and it had 58,000 signatures in just 4 days. And get this, even Fox affiliate stations were saying that they wouldn't air it. It was like a mass protest out of nowhere. So a few days after all of that ruckus, Rupert Murdoch himself, the owner of both Fox and HarperCollins, made the call to kill the book and pulp the 400,000 copies that he had already paid to print. The success of this spontaneous protest meant that the book would never be officially public. And then something, well, even stranger happened. While OJ had successfully hidden his assets from the Goldman's ability to collect for almost a decade, the Goldman's lawyers realized that the manuscript represented a strange kind of intellectual property, one that they could use a bankruptcy court to gain control of and then publish themselves. While OJ's team fought them, attempting to hide the book in a shell company, they eventually prevailed. And on September 13th, 2007, they published it with their own foreword and afterword, to the utter fascination of the nation. And that might sound kind of untoward to you, the victims of the murder profiting off the sale of the killer's confession, and a lot of the audience thought so too. but it nonetheless made for some great TV. And this copy right here, I read it, I annotated it, and I want to talk about how insane the document really is. While it's technically titled, If I Did It, The Confessions of the Killer, the Goldmans hid the if inside the tiniest font in the I to send the real message of what the book contains. But let's just talk about this confession, because if you had come from another planet or somehow escaped ever knowing about anything about this case, and your first foray into the O.J. Simpson story was the 200-page confession between the foreword and the afterword, then the first 5 chapters come across like a rather unfortunate love story. O.J. Simpson is a talented ex-footballer who left his first wife for Nicole Brown, who was a waitress he met at an LA diner during the divorce proceedings. And the two of them fell madly in love. Sure, according to O.J., like any couple, they had their ups and downs. Like the time that he got into an argument over some earrings, and then he smashed apart her car, one that he is careful to say that he paid for, with a baseball bat, but overall, he comes off as a decent, patient, wounded guy with an occasional temper trying to navigate an ugly divorce. Meanwhile, Nicole Brown is unstable. She's promiscuous, and it is heavily implied over and over again using mostly unspecified drugs. By his account, they were just another imperfect couple. And who hasn't done a few things that wouldn't come across, well, maybe not so perfectly at a murder trial with evidence collected by corrupted cops? I mean, really. Overall, it's a reasonably convincing facade, and it continues out of context until he has to deal with well-known evidence that was actually presented at the trial and encountered by hundreds of millions of people. Notably, a 911 call that Nicole made in October 2023, just a few months before she was murdered. He documented it verbatim in the book. The tape is legitimately horrible, but there was a TV dramatization of the transcript, which was, you get the point.
Can you send someone over here right away, please? What's the emergency? My ex-husband just broke in and now he's...
Okay, what's his name?
O.J. Simpson.
Is he the sportscaster or
Yes,
whatever?
that's right.
I mean, just seeing those words in print, he is trying to put them in the most favorable light he can. And yet it's hard to reconcile the man he portrays himself to be and Nicole's own terrified voice while on the phone with the police. And it's around this point that any careful reader should realize that O.J. isn't a reliable narrator. I mean, you don't break down the door to your ex-wife's house just because you're a good guy trying to have a rational conversation. And of course, we all know that a murder is right around the corner in chapter 6, which is the whole reason that anyone actually bought the book in the first place. And it's also the point that this entire train goes all the way off the rails. Now remember, O.J. sold the book to HarperCollins originally under the pretense that he would be confessing to the murder. Judith Reagan, his editor, paid O.J. $1 million specifically for that right. She hired a ghostwriter to gather the confession under the prediction that this book would top all the bestseller lists. And yeah, okay, sure, O.J. was going to couch the whole thing as hypothetical to give himself some legal wiggle room in case there was a second prosecution, but the audience came because they wanted to hear his real account of what happened that night. As a writer of books myself, I have to say that this is a very difficult narrative to hold together, and O.J. and his ghostwriter, they completely botched it. Because after about 150 pages of O.J. telling you that he was a great guy, the 6th chapter, titled The Night in Question, completely flips the script. He describes a heretofore never been mentioned friend named Charlie who tells him that Nicole has been getting kinky on her vacations and doing lots of drugs, which provokes O.J. into a rage because he has to protect his children from this out-of-control woman, where the two of them then go over to the house together, and O.J. has a big knife, and then he takes the knife from Charlie, and then O.J. stabs both Nicole and Ron Goldman. And Ron was a waiter from a nearby restaurant, not actually her lover, who I thought he was, and he was only there to return a pair of glasses. Well, they both died brutally. Here he is paraphrasing that section of the book on his exclusive Fox interview.
And this guy kind of got into a karate thing. And I said, well, you think you can kick my ass? And I remember I grabbed a knife. I do remember that portion, taking a knife from Charlie. And to be honest, After that, I don't remember, except I'm standing there and there's all kind of stuff around and
What kind of stuff?
blood and stuff around.
What the actual fuck? He didn't only write the account through a ghostwriter, but he went on national television to recount the whole thing, again saying specifically that he, quote, remembered taking the knife from his buddy. I'm not sure how you hypothetically remember anything, but then again, I also think that Charlie isn't a real person, but actually a manifestation of his subconscious, as he, tries to provide some cover for what actually happened. Anyway, I have to ask you, is there any world where a person who gets away with murder in what might be the most high-profile trial in history, and then not confess to the crime that he maintains he never had any part in? Why would he undermine his whole case just for a check? And then it's the next chapter where things get even sort of more strange, because OJ is immediately back to professing his innocence after just admitting to the crime, saying that the cops were planting evidence and trying to trick him into saying incriminating statements during his interrogation. He expresses his shock that people were upset at him for attending Nicole's funeral and how the media had already all but convicted him. Reading it all is like experiencing a hypothetical bout of whiplash after someone rear-ends your hypothetical white Bronco. So I want to offer up a hypothesis about what is really happening in the book and the media circus all around OJ. I don't think it's all that controversial now that OJ actually did commit the murders. Most people, even his ghostwriter, believed he did it. It's also pretty obvious that he didn't mind making a little money.
Some people say maybe it's blood money. Well, guess what? Every book that was written about this case was blood money.
But even that bit is a little bit of a red herring, because $1 million wouldn't even put a dent into what he owed his lawyers or the Goldman family. No, I think that OJ's actual motivation to write the book was something much more familiar to all of us in a world of social media, one that he created, which is that he is a malignant narcissist who needs to remain at the center of the national attention.
I think honestly what drives him is the need to be in the limelight. Any way he gets it, negative, positive, he doesn't care. He wants to be in the limelight. And remember, he can't be retried for this murder, so he can come as close as he wants to virtually admitting it, and still nothing happens.
He'd had 8 years where his stories sort of declined and no one really wanted to work with him, so he needed another fix. So someone came up with the idea of a confession. Maybe it was his kids, maybe it was his agent. But anyway, the networks and the book publishers worked just like TikTok and YouTube and Instagram work today to monetize what would be a new surge of attention. It was all about pressing more narcissism into our feeds. To put it another way, I don't think it's possible to understand the O.J. Simpson case at all without also interrogating the role that it played in structuring the attention economy that we swim in. One where malignant narcissists like our president...
I know O.J. very well. I knew him very well.
Like the wellness grifters who sell miracle cures, like the entire Kardashian family that actually rose to prominence because of the OJ trial.
Like, it's disturbing.
Have come to be the most influential and powerful people in the world. The lesson isn't don't get caught. It's never stop being interesting. And to prove that point just a little more, there's one more piece of evidence. A few days before the Goldman family released the book, O.J. Simpson got arrested for stealing back his own sports memorabilia from a hotel room in Las Vegas. And even more bizarrely, he actually videotaped himself committing the crime as it happened. The timing was too perfect, and maybe it was an attempt to sell that footage to a network and then drown out the publicity that was already coming down the pipeline with the book release. Either way, the only currency that OJ knows is attention, and we remain the inheritors of that sin. Ultimately, OJ spent 9 years in jail for the break-in, which was aggravated by a kidnapping charge. For many Americans, this was a satisfying coda to his life story. While he wouldn't do time for the murders themselves, he did ultimately go behind bars, at least for a little while. And when he was paroled in December 2021, the media continued to slavishly follow him around everywhere he went.
How in the world y'all been Y'all stalking me?
O.J. Simpson is startled by a photographer outside a Nevada gas station shortly after being released from prison.
He died in April 2024, successfully defending his fortune and estate from the Goldman's efforts to collect while he was alive. A strategy that only collapsed when he died.
Simpson's estate agreed to pay Goldman's father nearly $58 million.
But remember, until the end of his life, O.J. was both remembered fondly by the President of the United States and was still an incredibly wealthy man. Maybe it's only now that we can finally close the book on his story, even though we still live in the world that his saga created. Thanks so much for watching this video. I never thought that I would do a video on O.J. Simpson in my life, but when I realized how fundamental he was to the world that we live in today, I just couldn't resist. If you want to support the kind of independent journalism I do, I'd love to see you over in my private Discord server and have you sign up for my newsletter where premium members get early access to my videos before they come out here on YouTube. Drop me a line down in the comments if you have any ideas for what I should cover next. From Fox to Us Inc. in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.